Hello YouTube, it's Hinsoog here, present and accounted for. It has been a long time since I posted and a lot's happened. And there's some big ideas I want to share that I think are helpful, and I feel like there's some stuff I have to update that I've talked about before, particularly addiction, because thought I mathed out the perfect set of reasoning to prevent an alcohol relapse ever again, and part of my isolation tour, which is fairly natural anyway because I think I do have schizotypy traits, schizotypal. I've been trying to represent schizotypal, which is part of the issue because I've encountered real schizotypal. But there's a certain amount of shame in thinking you've beaten alcohol and then having gone a long time, giving yourself the most beautiful things you've ever given yourself in the world, and some event in your life precipitates this set of reasoning that's like, well, I can play the moderation game for this occasion, for this memory, for this, whatever, right? That's the problem with addicts, the reasoning part of the brain can sort of edge them towards their destruction. And so they have to admit to powerlessness and change everything and all these different ways. And I've got some ideas related to that, and also about schizotypal, and a really fun way to frame the problems in the world and reasoning, just talking about parts of the human brain. So yep, I'm Hinsoog, and one of the things that I used to be very present on the schizotypal subreddit, and actually that was one of the things that happened that I'm ashamed of, is my alcohol relapse. The sequence of alcohol relapses after I gave it up eventually bled into me. I was a moderator on the schizotypal subreddit, and very active, and bled into there. I lashed out at somebody who it felt like I had a good reason. They were using their diagnosis as an excuse for some behavior, but of course I was like super toxic about it. And the thing about alcohol, right? You could be right about something, about what you're all lit up about, but you're wrong when you're the monstrous, addicted, psychotic alcoholic, drinking to the level of what is essentially psychosis for the super bingers. And actually that's probably a good way to start, is a realization about what alcohol does that I think has to do with the sections of our brain. I think maybe it would help a lot of things if people started thinking about how the lovely part of the life and being what we think of as human, and all these romantic ideas we get when we're little, like love and idealism and altruism, and all the things that are good, the things about making life less animal, and maximizing pleasure, less pain, more peace, deciding, lovely ideas like diversity is our strength, international law, having good international relationships, that keep everything stable, keep the animal part of us from turning into, bloody religious death cults, or cultish groupthink behavior. So the good part of humanity, it's called the thing that matters about everything maybe is the neocortex. It's right here in your brain. These folds of brain matter called the neocortex. Most important part of it being in the frontal lobe. I think it's also called isocortex. And that's what gives us this beautiful everything. Like everything that's exciting. Video games like Nier with these beautiful ideas to combat the worst like demons haunting our brains, like all of it. And then when you drink, there's this thing that happens. Like you can get drunk enough where the neocortex is basically diminished or maybe eventually destroyed, right? You know, there's some people are always wondering about the rock bottom for alcoholics when out of necessity they give it up, right? But you know, there's never really a rock bottom. You just keep hollowing yourself out until death or dementia. And as related to dementia, it's like, I think alcohol and addiction, it attacks the neocortex, the thing that has you weight things, the value of things properly. You know, certain arguments aren't worth destroying this relationship, for example. You know, you weight the argument versus the relationship on a practical level, and all that happens in your neocortex. And you drink enough and you destroy whatever that is, that proper valuing system, and your midbrain takes over, our lizard brain, our ancient monkey lizard part of our brain, which is pretty much the limbic system. So you got your idealism section, and then the limbic system, the midbrain, that can take over. It's like it can be the person behind the wheel. Unfortunately, it's the animal, the growling tiger, the psychotic person not valuing things properly. And it gets threats. You get some threat signal. So let's see. So first your amygdala detects the threat, sends the threat signal to the hypothalamus. This is all the limbic midbrain. So detect the threat with amygdala. Threat goes to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus fills you full of adrenaline and all this stuff that activates the animal. And the neocortex is barely present, and you're a lion hunting, like staring down meat or something. You know, it's just it's a mess, and something comes out that you can't agree with. And actually maybe that's still when you're in kind of the good section of things is when you can come out of that state and be like, oh yeah, some of that was crazy, the valuation's all wrong, but it's still destructive, and you were still abusive, and you know, and so it sucks to have to live with that and have to account for all the damage and get out of it and forgive yourself and hope some people forgive you, some people won't. You know, like it kind of feels like a loss of integrity to relapse after thinking you've beaten it. And you know, it's a bummer. And my kind of recent drama in life is dealing with this idea of powerlessness, you know, to try to take the reasoning out of it. You know, 12-step programs use that idea of powerlessness. And actually, I guess my influence here is going to be mixed, but I still feel like there's some part, you can still math it out in a way that I think can be helpful, even though you know that the reasoning has failed you before and you relapsed. you know, in the end, I think that a lot of things still get mathed out. You know, you realize, I think even a person who's like completely dogmatic about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, like its own little mini religion with a dogma. Even those people, I think, and that beat alcohol, they have a reason to beat it, you know, and maybe it's because they want to be a good mother, or they don't want to. They think there's some potential in them to be not the worst thing that they know that they are at risk of becoming. You know, they don't want to, or they don't want to be homeless or you know, whatever it is. You know, I'm kind of at this is a rough spot for me in my life right now, because I probably lost my job over it recently, but I'm very privileged, and I still have, and we're all privileged who can still conceivably get some kind of job, you know, which is why, and as soon as you have a job, you know, I feel like it's a short walk to give yourself some kind of hope, because, you know, I feel like this might not sound like the healthiest reasoning, but I mean, the brain's an addictive thing. There's always there's a high you're always chasing that's good. It's like you should be, you know, I feel like the good way to frame sobriety is kind of a celebration, because you're chasing after the highs that don't destroy you, essentially, you know, and there's so many of them, and there's such an easy reach for quite a few of us in most ranges of privilege, you know, like, and I realize this is part of why I shouldn't try to represent schizotypal, is because, you know, there's, well, here, I guess we'll go into that. I encountered an example of schizotypal in the world. So I live in Nebraska. This is a house in the middle of a cornfield, but, you know, not all that far away, there's a big city in Nebraska called, a lovely big city called Omaha. And there's a person I found, I found this on the Omaha subreddit. So there's a guy who people have labeled as schizophrenic, who he does the things that you can find if you kind of search the professional literature on schizotypal, which, by the way, it's schizotypal, you know, because it's schizophrenia phenotype. But, you know, schizotypal sounds nice because, you know, if we talk about schizophrenia traits or schizotypal traits, then the word we want to use is schizotypy, which is probably called schizotypy. Anyway, schizotypal, schizotypal, schizotypy, 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 blah, blah, blah. But this guy, he was doing all this stuff. He goes out into public and he's walking around, you know, like in heavy clothes and all the time, and in a hoodie and a backpack, and he's a homeless guy, and he wanders around with a which I don't know how much details I should go into, but waving a flag that's essentially a hate symbol. And people that talk to him feel like it's hard to, you're not really talking to him. It's like you're talking to like a conversation he's having with himself, which is probably, I don't know. I think I've seemed like that sometimes, which is kind of funny, but, you know, depending on how lit up I am about some idea, you know. But anyway, he wildly gesticulates in public, you know. He's upsetting for some people to encounter, and he's waving around this hate symbol, and probably everything about his reasoning about it's fragmented, except for some bit of trauma and fear that he's like gripped onto and is protecting himself against. And in his case, it probably has to do with, you know, this toxifying effect that racism has on people that probably breaks some amount of minds, and it's impossible to really cope with. And anyway, he's the version of schizotypal that's probably why the label exists. Not, you know, privileged people being like, God, if I relapse again, I might have to, you know, work a different job. Oh no, you know. And there's like, there's something I'm sure if there's something lovable about this person, you know, their perspective is probably fascinating. I imagine I'd have fun talking to him if I could, but you know, it's just in a situation. It's just a personality that's very much at risk, and I don't have the answer for that person. Like I'm not. I've been all grandiose about talking about schizotypal, and I feel like at some point maybe I should stop talking about it because it feels fraudulent, because I'm not engaged in the world in that way. Then I'm like, well, you know, the homeless housing should work this way and should have this so they're not miserable and, you know, going back outside and all this stuff. You know, there's like a million. It's an endless rabbit hole. But I can tell you that, you know, one of the schizotypal traits that I relate to most of his ideas of reference, and I've been getting that a lot from the internet. You know, it seems like a lot of stuff I've talked about in relation to schizotypal is like all over now, you know, like demanding me to somehow take part. You know, it's like the world's speaking to you, and it's like I imagine it happens a lot to schizophrenics. Like it's like the weight of the world just comes on top of you and it's shouting at you at all directions, and shouting at you specifically. It like has to do with your behaviors. And like I think sometimes it can be romantic, like, you know, like it can maybe enrich a spiritual perspective, you know, thinking that you're part of some cosmic good and evil. You're on this stage of good and evil in the world, and, you know, maybe it's part of being more constructive and fending off things that are bad. But then there's a bad version where bad stuff happens and you blame yourself in the weirdest ways. Somebody has a bad mood and you're like, oh, it's because I'm terrible in some way, isn't it? Or something bad happens and you blame yourself. And I still even get this from the subreddit. I think it's the schizotypal subreddit, I think, got unhealthy for me because there's certain things that happen, and I don't know if it was like a reaction against me. You know, even recently, somebody was watching a bunch of YouTube videos about schizotypal, and it was part of whatever event that led them to not be to give up the fight, stop sensing hope about the future. And this was mostly precipitated about me giving up alcohol again, right? And of course I did, and it's tough to talk about because maybe it'll just sound like an echo, right? Alcoholics, at a certain point, people just stop believing them. It's like, well, no, I'm giving up alcohol. I have plenty of reasons, and I have a lot of tools in the toolkit. And eventually you just have to choose. Eventually just choose. You're like, well, I like the version of my life where alcohol doesn't exist. Maybe in a perfect world, we could make alcohol illegal. And actually, the alcoholic would probably choose that when they're freshly destroyed and they're like, no, I got to give it up. And as part of that, they'd probably sign themselves a thing that says, nope, it's no longer illegal to sell me alcohol. Whew. And then they can just, and you just own a world without alcohol and live in it. And, life forces you to live it. And that's a good way to force yourself to live it. Alcohol does not exist for me any longer. And I'm not powerless. I feel like I've got like one of my causes now is stubbornness. I'm not powerless. Reason did fail me, but it's me who's choosing to give up alcohol. And not that the other part of that I think is beautiful about the 12-step programs that I feel like I have to give a bow to is this idea of a higher power, which, if you're like me and you realize dogma, which is, people, this cultish way that people are, where they put their whole faith in something and they can't question the set of whatever it is. Believing things on bad evidence is part of it, religions are, it's like, so many of us, it's like religion's part of the neocortex. It's like part of all these beautiful idealistic ideas. But then in practice, there's some dogma. There's something barbaric in the dogma. And people are like, well, we got to get rid of that. That's got to get updated. And, it's a big mess. And it somehow ends up getting part of the other big thing I want to talk about. I want to spread this idea of neurotypical personality disorder. Maybe one of my big triggers in life that was part of my bad reasoning. I think maybe a lot of us are having a lot of catastrophic thoughts about the nature of humanity and us at first, them, and the cultish way people are. And I think, I want to tell people who are neurodivergent, whether it's schizotypal, some schizotypy traits, autism spectrum disorder, whatever, that there's some superpower. They came out of the collective unconscious. They're set of genes. They're weird traits that have been put them on the outskirts, got them called weird however many times. It also comes with strengths, and I think one of the strengths is when you're by nature for some reason socially disconnected, like social disconnection happens in schizophrenia and schizotypy and autism. The outside looking in, there's something ungroupthink about it. Like, you can watch people as what would be a healthy mass, cooperating, listening to each other, making decisions as like a group, watch it become toxic and dogmatic and like hopelessly enslaved to groupthink in these ways that are just harrowing because you probably know what I'm talking about on some level. Maybe I should just be more specific, but if I don't use certain triggering words, maybe it's kind of like people can go back both ways with it and figure out what their group think problem is. Where did they fall off the rationality? Where did they stop becoming rational for the sake of some cultish dogmatic thing? And anyway, neurodivergence, I think, are especially in a good place to fight that, whatever it is. And there's examples in the culture where there's neurodivergent people very much going insane because of social media and whatever happens, whatever this cultish thing is about being an average neurotypical person, having neurotypical personality disorder as an autistic person. And, you know, and part of it's related to my brain idea. Like, one of the things, let's just throw a word out there. Fascism. Something about fascism is anti-intellectual. Why? What makes sense? How does this make sense? And how do I put it in the context I've laid here? Well, we're having an ADHD moment here. Or what? Thought blocking, or where you're sidelined, or whatever. Or maybe the idea, when you're dealing with like a really big idea with lots of parts. I don't want to delete this one, so I'm holding on. But anti-intellectual. Well, the thing about intellectualism is it's part of the beautiful part of the neocortex, where you think you can build a system for the world that doesn't include some of the problems of being a demagogue or demagoguery, which that's another word I hope people start using. It's perfect. Being a demagogue is kind of riling up this midbrain. It riles up the midbrain, where it's like this prejudice of them. There's a threat out in the world, and it's them. And that's probably all of it. This us versus them. This thing, the threat sensor in our brain grabs onto it and gets attached to it, because things that are scary and that hurt, you're looking for them, especially in cluster A, constantly looking for the problem, and in one way or another you find it and you latch onto it and you get emotional about it. Your thoughts get frenzied and fragmented about it. Choose irrational ways to cope with it. Well, what's happening with people, there's a them, whatever it is, immigrants or something, people with a different skin color, people with a different sex, it's like, it doesn't even matter. It's like it could be anything. And the demagogue riles up, or Democrats. I'm just going to say it. I'm just so people know, because I think part of a beautiful project on the internet is showing people, hey, this is the thing I am, and don't hate me. I'm a Democrat. And the reason I'm a Democrat is because I think that, to me, a Democrat is somebody that just wants everybody to have health care. They're not bad guys. And that's happening in our culture, right? It's an us versus them. Democrats, there's a message out there from a leader of a personality cult saying Democrats are bad people. And I feel like I kind of did a self-own identifying with schizotypal, because it's like, well, is that person irrational in some way? And I'm saying, yeah, I've got schizotypy traits, but there's certain things happening in the culture where I know I'm rational and I know I'm not a bad person. The reason I think Democrat is good is it's a person that wants people to have health care. Maybe they have some work to do on, some financial policy or whatever, But especially in a world where jobs are getting eaten up by things like AI and whatnot, I mean, who's going to kick off lovely things like universal basic income? Who's going to get that going? It's probably going to be a Democrat. It's probably going to be a Democrat. It's probably not going to be a demagogue that's trying to get you all riled up about whoever to take power. And I think the demagogue part of us, gets gripped by that fear of the them. It's part of the midbrain, and it takes over your better angel. And our better angel, the angels, are in your neocortex, for sure. And it allows you to say things like, you know what? Gay people are pretty awesome. I don't think anybody should bully a gay person. I don't know when demagoguery or this like appeal to the midbrain even shut down that lovely idea. You know. Anyway, I have to start worrying about time. I get carried away. I get carried away. But I also, in my process of giving up alcohol again, I was in rehab. And I got to meet somebody with schizoaffective disorder. And it was a lovely experience. Now I'm doing this like list style. I think maybe I should be rapid fire about it. And it was lovely. I can tell one of the lovely things that happened when I posted videos originally is people with schizoaffective disorder would really relate to me a lot. It was like easy to identify with whatever I am. And let's just say there's definitely people out in the world who think I have schizophrenia, which is definitely funny. But you can kind of tell this person, I don't know if they were full schizoaffective, you know, maybe it's the same, whoever diagnosed them is the same person, same, type of professional that would think that I'm schizophrenic, which actually I did have a professional, another psychiatrist say that I fit his profile for schizoid, which is very related, right? But, he doesn't, the message is, you don't want to pathologize people. And an update, I think people who are researching schizotypal and schizoid should follow Eleanor Greenberg on Quora, who thinks that if you have whole object relations, you do not have a personality disorder, even if you have traits or whatever. And that, I think, is actually also part of this, because it's not splitting on a person. Processing a person as a whole individual with goods and bads and stuff they're working on and flaws, and to at least not hate them, to not because I think sometimes what happens in schizophrenia it's called antagonomia, where something becomes all bad and like you can't even chip away at that. It's like they really split on a person or a group or what. And it's like impenetrable, or it feels that way. Which is another thing about schizotypal. You see how it seems like I can unsplit and I can reason through, and I'd be like, oh, this isn't an evil thing about a person. It's just, maybe this person's in a cult and their midbrain gets triggered and they're scared and they've been offered security through whatever, so you don't have you can think that I don't have a personality disorder, and I've given myself permission to think I don't have a personality disorder, but I can see my schizotypy traits when I talk to somebody with schizoaffective. It's like they pass in and out of rationality, this hyper cerebral, they were all the schizotypic things, like super cerebral, stuck in their head. Their affect was kind of mixed up, they didn't really smile very much. I'm smiling, right? So, that's why it's a little funny to identify as schizotypal, because there's a version of it where the person, it's not just social anhedonia where it's like good, positive social outcomes, just the hope of good social outcomes disappears. It's also like they stop experiencing pleasure, and smiling's not in the cards. And those people, I think we should deserve the most sympathy. People who have like anhedonia, like all the way deep, and it's so amazing. They're fascinating people to encounter, because in a way, you can almost be sort of jealous of them if you're kind of temperamental and emotionally dysregulated, and you get caught in your head and torture yourself with whatever idea, to encounter this person who doesn't even seem like words have any land on them, and they're somehow functional in the world, but the social world doesn't exist, and they stop responding to speech and also stop smiling. Anyway, I'm in a million directions, but I kind of like what I've got going so far, so I'm gonna continue. Anyway, the schizoaffective person was wonderful, and I can tell why people. It makes me confident that it's not completely inappropriate that I would try to represent schizotypia a little bit. But there's that person in Omaha, or there's a homeless person right now who doesn't think they has reason to believe that they're now on the periphery of society and they can't get a job and they're homeless. And depression, I think, does this thing where it can be basically this mixture of nihilism and you need a respite from it somehow. And and this is where I think the issue of reasoning even comes back for a homeless person. Maybe part of what got them there was mental illness or which I guess we can include as alcoholism. It seems like, well, you see a homeless person drinking and it seems like it's practically offensive, but there's a person out there who, their options have been dried up and alcohol is the only respite they literally have. If you imagine being homeless and you really can't get a job, and then just periodically by chance or with some effort, they get the brief little respite of alcohol. And in a way, it's bad to bring up, but I'm not that person, and you're probably not that person. And even if you are that person, there's, I suppose that's society's neocortex problem, is how to, take care of those people, how to value life always, even if, we have a really difficult problem as a creature, and that's the way our genes just replicate, and it seems like if you math it out, eventually there would always be some kind of conflict just out of the replicating nature of genes, and eventually it's you live or they live, and one creature is fighting for resources and the other creature is fighting for resources, and maybe there's some way to solve conflict that arises naturally like that without being animals and causing pain and leaving people on the outskirts behind. Anyways, how can we bring this baby home? Oh, I guess something related to that is one of the things that caused me to relapse is I think there's something happening in our culture that kind of makes sense, kind of doesn't, where we're selling. So young people are drinking less. And there's something in our culture where, people are starting to get a little, the issue of young people staying alone and not mating is starting to become pretty salient. And one of the ideas is, well, they got to drink and be in the same area as... Oh, hopefully this didn't screw up my video. I don't think it did. Nope. Oh, shoot. Now we're talking. I should probably delete this one. But I guess I seem a little scattered in a way that feels good to have on video. Oh, another thing, big thing in the reasons I wanted to do this is to have this sort of accountability about a couple of people I definitely hurt. And it's a hurt that I've felt. It's a hurt that probably you felt. And it's another idea as a reference thing I have. The idea of limerence is starting to spread. I see it all over YouTube. I think therapists, like a lot of professionals are starting to use this idea. I think what happens is whatever it is about getting attached to somebody and fall in love with them, somebody you're really attracted to and can be mate with, it's like a part of our animal we can't really escape, and it hurts really bad. Like I think breakups traumatize people. You know, if it starts out when you're young is the most beautiful idea. Two people who take ownership of each other to the point where they're choosing pleasure for each other, they're supporting each other, they're best friends, and the best natural highs in the world that everybody celebrates are all contained in this beautiful thing, and they're full of attraction toward each other, and it's so perfect. And then one of them breaks up with the other one, and it seems callous and terrible, and they never get over it, and it's the most painful thing. Like, I think if you have a lover and it's going well and you lose that experience, like, I really think it's one of the most painful experiences available to generally human experience. And it's like this, and I think it kind of starts this pattern where people are suspicious of each other, like they're searching for the betrayer, and then you know, maybe they need to meet a new person to have that experience with, but there's just a little that the experience of being broken up with or losing somebody, even if you're the one that breaks up with somebody, I think it also hurts in that direction, where that's a painful thing, and because it's painful, our brain latches onto it and wants to protect against it, and in the act of protecting against it, people start destroying new relationships or the same relationship to try to, you know, like, maybe that's why you know, you see in fiction, you know, of how of this valuing, this like ultimate valuing of the virgin, and maybe it's just because they haven't experienced, they're not at risk of being in this loop of hurtfulness where it's like, you know, the two people are in cooperation and they're still choosing pleasure for each other. You know, they're not, it's not like, it doesn't resemble warfare yet, you know. And I think it's like a movie. If you've ever seen the movie It Follows, it's a horror movie where there's something in the world chasing you that's trying to kill you. And maybe it's like this trauma, fantasy trauma archetype or something. Something's creeping towards me, and I have to defend myself against it. It's going to kill me. And maybe it formed originally in some attachment trauma, something horrific that you're on guard for forever now, and you are on guard for it. And to get rid of it, of the imminence of the attack, you have to have sex with somebody, and then they have it and you don't. And I think that's what's happening in the dating world. People are betraying each other, and it's just this spreading sickness. Except it's worse, because in that movie, the person you have sex with now has that, and you don't until they get killed. But in real life, it's like, you know, one narcissist causes all these I guess what are effectively borderlines, right? Like, not really, but kind of, just hunting for their betrayer. And it's just hurtful. But this is where I think I can talk about my disease, the part of me that I think's a disease, and that's the thing I can't shake is something called schizotypal ambivalence. And I don't think it's if some part of you is truly torn, and I mean ambivalence as like emotionally torn in two directions to the point of paralysis. And if you're ambivalent, even about being in a relationship, it's tough to move past that. Like, and it's not even fair to subject another person to it. So it's like, like at a certain point, I feel like if I care about somebody that I'm attracted to, I actually probably should avoid triggering some sort of hope in them, because the ambivalent person is, there's a high risk that they're just going to do the thing that people identify as narcissists doing. They value you a lot and then discard you eventually. And then you're just like, what happened? So, and I'm not, if people are studying narcissism or they're a narcissist themselves and they identify with me, that's okay. But I want to say that if you want to think of me as a narcissist, I'm not truly a narcissist because I'm neurotic. Neurotic's bad, right? It's all this self-doubt and thinking you're not worthy in some way and like you're a burden. And there's like all these, eventually it sounds like you're describing depression. If you try to sum up neuroticism enough, well, if you're self-critical and you're beating yourself up, you're not really a narcissist. Like if we could inject neuroticism into the problematic narcissists in the world would probably be a lot different. If like our chief narcissist had moments where it's like, you know what, I'm destroying a lot of relationships for no reason. I feel bad about it and I should change, like that would be a healthy narcissist. You take the good things and protect against the bad things. So, maybe if narcissism's not a completely bad word, when you're neurotic, it can be good, and I'm neurotic and I've done the narcissist pattern and I heard a couple of people and they're probably watching. Is another reason why making these is, when that there's at least like two people hate watching your content, that also makes it uncomfortable. But I think whatever limerence is, where you get attached to the other part about limerence is it's like you turn the world into this love chessboard where everything has some connection to that hurt, to that addiction, to this love object or whatever. It's like something little happens and it reminds you of that person, or the person behaves, does anything towards you, or does anything, literally anything. A light turns on. Literally anything can feel attached to this love object, and it makes you crazy. I think people with borderline traits and schizotypy traits probably are at extreme risk of limerence, and I'm talking about it because there's somebody limerent out there over me, and hopefully it isn't just a cycle revenge. I think that actually there's the person who's most limerent about me, they've found a way to turn it into a constructive thing, which is music in their case. And if you can turn limerence into a flower and it blossoms into something, probably a better relationship, lovely songs that people can enjoy that relate to some part of it. I don't know how you beat limerence. I feel like my ability to make this video means I've beat it a little bit. Like I had somebody who come back into my life, and it like I could, your brain turns into an echo chamber of that conflict, and I think I've mostly beat it, which is probably another reason why I can I can do this video, which is probably now way too long and too everywhere, but I'm Hinsoog, and I'm here, and I'm accounted for, fresh out of rehab, fighting for health. I still have something like social anhedonia, but I kind of am sorting it out. Like some people in my life think I have to completely change this thing where I'm super social and I have a social job and all this stuff, which is, if anybody's hiring, I've got, I don't know. I think even my parents, my parents just want me to stop to live my life and to not, and it's like when you have an alcohol relapse, it's like, all right, now time's up. Now you got to change something. And I think I'm close enough to schizoid that I have just enough social anhedonia, and like the experience of solitude is rewarding for me. Like I'm in there right now, but I'm also social, right? I'm not 100% on the hermit scale, right? This is a fun schizoid thing to do. Also schizotypal, right? But I had a therapist thought that I don't come across as like, schizotypal. Maybe there's something like new age about it or something, people with these like new age attitudes and it's like alienating to more traditionally minded people. So you got this crazy character that normal people want to call weird, but they're totally invested in their head spaces, but they can be talked out of bad ideas. They're not fully schizophrenic. There's a tragic well, I'm not going to go down that road, but okay, here we go. I think we're getting close to and I wanted to talk about another thing I feel like it's related to all this. I think one of the only times somebody kind of was partially lashing out at me on the schizotypal subreddit is I'm starting to feel nervous about content I put out, because when you make videos, it has any number of views, you're definitely touching people. And schizotypal and schizophrenia and schizoaffective and they're vulnerable populations that are at high risk of having the depressed person delusion, where it's like there's no hope, and they sell themselves on a set of bad ideas for calling it quits. I don't want to be part of that. So a criticism I got on the subreddit is that it seems like in one of my videos, like I'm selling nihilism, like this sense of, and I even kind of try to make it kind of a cluster A thing, even though it kind of is, kind of isn't, because, if anhedonia is part of schizotypy, then it feels related, this feeling like nothing has meaning. The world is just a hedonic treadmill where you're going after what gives you spikes of dopamine, and it's just managing that. Even my idea of like, if you're being celebrating sobriety and you're just choosing natural highs that don't destroy you in your relationships, even that feels like nihilism to me, because it's not part of some greater journey of accomplishing something beautiful and making the world better, all the beautiful stuff, and you just kind of feel like you're just a dopamine creature, and it's all just wind, right? Like, you lose faith in afterlife and all this, and it just, the idea of death approaching is like this painful thing is part of it. And it seemed like I was selling nihilism. And here's my unselling of it. I think there's a short walk between nihilism and Stoicism. Two things that are very different, but I think, you can travel between them quickly. Nothing's meaning anything to, it's almost like, I feel like Stoicism, it feels bigger than, it's almost like a better mood. It's like if you're nihilistic and you're in a good mood, and then suddenly you think that little things are beautiful. Little things have all the meaning in the world. Despite, maybe it's just the color green or something, and it just fills your heart in a way that, in a nihilistic perspective, it's just arbitrary. Everything's arbitrary. Everything's preferences. The thing that makes me high is eating guacamole or getting excited about some idea of video games, which I think all that's still, I feel like, enough, like if your reason to stay alive is because you need to see part 3 of the Final Fantasy VII remakes, like that sounds unhealthy, but like, is it? But anyway, I feel like nihilism is this perfect, valueless way of looking at the world. Everything's arbitrary, and maybe you can excuse unhealthy behaviors that way because we're just here for spikes of dopamine anyway. And it's almost like very at risk, for the reasons depression puts you at risk. Your perspective turns on you, and you're mean to yourself, and then it toxifies your outlooking perspective, and then you're irritable about things in the world, and you lose hope in humanity. But then a short walk and you're stoic. Little things have meaning. You feel idealistic. Your life's not just a hedonic dopamine treadmill. You're feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. You're not totally self-absorbed. It's like, I feel like it can be an undogmatic version of idealism, to be to value things properly and to be in a good direction as like a cooperation project, but not being too attached to anything. Like, I feel like some people, if they're giving up alcohol and then they get addicted to the rat race in some way, and if something goes wrong, then what? Then they're drinking. They use it as an excuse to drink again. Something they put all their hope in that. They got attached to the thing. It didn't work out. Now they're drinking again. And it's like with Stoicism, it's like you keep the detachment. You realize that status symbols are just another thing that can go wrong, and that you can get addicted to, and so forth. And so you say that's meaningless, right? In kind of a nihilistic way, all that's meaningless. Status symbols, being in some rat race, but then also being part of a project that you feel good about, making the world a little better, increasing pleasure as like almost like a community project, kind of like a meditation, like breathing and feeling the world and feeling that you're just part of nature, and you want to be a constructive part of it while not being overly attached to anything. I'm kind of spinning there's some part of this I feel like I'm missing, but the idea is nihilism is just what it is. It doesn't make anybody evil. And actually, I think the best way to deal with this is I have a recommendation. I don't know how often I'll post, but there's maybe we can call him a philosopher. His name's Alex O'Connor, and he did a video recently about nihilism that spoke to me completely, and it feels like it almost feels like it exists because it's an idea as a reference thing for me. It feels like that video exists because somebody lashed out at me about selling of nihilism. And Alex, the video is called "The Hidden Problem at the Heart of Nihilism," and one of his ideas is it almost seems like it's related to how you're feeling. You know, if you're like in agitated depression, nihilism's a problem. You know, and there's something arbitrary when life is just, if all life is just your preferences, and anytime you're explaining some idea or selling somebody on the idea and the only person sold on it is basically the same as you are, you know, and so you didn't make any progress. You just put new words to something somebody else was studying because they're similar to you. But it's a lovely way to take the fangs out of nihilism, as though it's some like evil force that the demagogues are gonna start calling out. You know, maybe that's the next thing. Is like, did you know any nihilists? That's the next bad guy that we gotta, you know, beat somehow or whatever. And it's really just helping depressed people in a way, you know, pull themselves out of the most harrowing pit, the abyss, you know. Maybe that's like a schizotypal thing. There's like a section of depression that's like an abyss that can swallow you, and you just helping people keep their heads out of that, or preparing them to do the short walk, like from spiraling all the way down to an abyss. You realize you take the short walk. Oh, humanity's fine. The neocortex exists. Video game developers exist. Near games exist. That's why I put the Yoko Taro exists. It's a bunch of preferences, right? So like, why are you saying that, Hinsoog? You know, it's arbitrary, right? Just talking about preferences, but there's always a short walk. I don't know how to punctuate that. Especially, I feel like one of the other ways to kind of protect yourself, another recommendation, Dr. Robert Sapolsky has a bunch of free lectures on YouTube. I'll link the Alex O'Connor video and Robert Sapolsky's channel. And one of his ideas is that free will doesn't exist, which threatens a lot of people. But I think, in a way, it's the most protective idea I can think of to make people more humanitarian to each other, because you realize that evil doesn't really exist. You know, you don't choose how you were born. You don't choose your personality. You don't just choose how protected and robust your neocortex is from whatever happens in psychosis. You know, I think, you know, it's sort of an interesting, you know, whatever precipitates all that isn't in a person's control. And so then you just take steps to be a human to another human, because, you know, even Trump, like the worst people in the world, you know, it's like a symptom of trauma doing this, and this, and antagonomia doing this, or, you know, and then their neocortex couldn't protect them from this. You know, I was listening to a police officer describe a certain kind of conflict some police officers encounter where the person has crazy eyes, as though that's like a sign of, I don't know if that's his way to wrestle with the idea of somebody in psychosis, and it's not, this isn't the full story, but you can tell kind of what happens is there's a threat, and, you know, it's a important part of psychosis is your midbrain, you know, the hypothalamus and the amygdala and all the fear stuff hijacks your better brain and makes you irrational, puts you in fight or flight. And of course, that's not the whole story, because like schizophrenic type of psychosis, the neocortex is also involved. Like some ideas are fragmenting and can't be consolidated into something constructive or useful. And so, you know, there's the fear part of it. hijacking the neocortex, but the neocortex isn't holding everything together properly, you know, because that's where the, you know, so yeah, Robert Sapolsky, Eleanor Greenberg on Quora. I found another good therapist on YouTube, Tim Fletcher, talks about limerence and trauma. And I think all the trauma talk's good because it makes people explore, you know, whatever defensive part of them, you know. It's an interesting way to study yourself. And it seems like even though the personality disorders don't necessarily have a history of trauma, it's just like, it's all kind of the same bucket of stuff, you know. But I guess my plea is that I still do like solitude, but I want to feel part of the world, and this will probably give me a mess of reason to have ideas of reference, because it's like, this is a thing that exists in the world now if I post it, right? But it's a good way to not go 100% on the loner scale and schizoid world and schizotypal world. Anyway, I'm sure I'm missing a million ideas, but alcohol's out of my life, and here we go. Thanks for listening to me. Sorry this is too long. See you later.